We love getting 1 mark questions in our exams. They feel sort of lovely, don't they? In this case, we've got a state command and it's asking me a feature of an artery. Okay, so obviously I'm going to be talking about this thing, but this is specific. Which feature, we sort of have to match this up, don't we? Which feature allows arteries to transport blood at high pressure? We know that arteries are close to the heart, they're vessels leaving the heart, therefore they have high pressure blood. So what is it about them? Well, the answer here, I want to show you marking methodology. The answer here, with no real introduction at all, we're just going to say here, thick, smooth muscle wall. That is effectively going to be our answer. And I'm going to do something that's not required here. I'm going to go ... and I'm going to say here, is able to cope with pressure or high pressure. I'll just put the word pressure in there just for speed. Okay, and I've already broken my own rules by flirting with the boundary there. Now, the point I want to make here is if I convert to my red pen here, folks, what I want to show you is that your examiner, albeit online and not with a pen, they're going to be doing a slightly different system, but effectively they're going to circle this or highlight this, they're going to tick it, and they're going to give you this mark over here. And by the way, they'll also reference this is marking point number 1, and potentially, or at least for relevance here, we can say that's the maximum for that mark. And the reason I'm putting that maximum is because basically, folks, this stuff here, which is in essence me rewriting, if you look here, transport blood at high pressure, I've basically rewritten that kind of statement here. This bit is not required. Why? Because I've been asked to state something. So you can save yourselves some time, you can save yourselves some kind of processing by just sort of cutting out those restating sort of factors from exam papers, including PE, because that's what we're interested in today. Now, the second thing, folks, is really for you guys to consider developing automaticity when it comes to blood vessels and this particular topic. We're looking at making our knowledge automatic. How do we do that? Well, we look at how questions are answered in the past and I'm sure in the future. When it comes to blood vessels, we might be asked to state things. We might be asked to describe those vessels. We might be asked to explain something about them. We might be asked for 1, 2, or 3. For example, explain 3 features or describe 2 functions. We could be asked about functions and structures, those separately. And of course, we've got our capillary, our artery, and our vein. And finally, we might be asked, sort of the ending of this question could be which allow them to transport blood or which aid performance. So, for example, we've got a question down here which is describe 3 structures of a capillary which aid performance. So the point I want to make here, folks, and teachers, please, if you're with the students, please work on these in the coming days. They're fantastic sort of revision lesson activities for you to be doing with the students. You can construct answers, all kinds of combinations of these. Now, you can imagine if I was taking structures of a capillary, I would be saying things like, 1 cell thick, okay? And I would be saying not just that, but I would be saying, for example, the way that aids performance is that we now get a short diffusion path, okay? Which means that, of course, more diffusion can happen at a higher rate of diffusion. So you can take your structure, which is 1 cell thick, and say, okay, it causes a short diffusion path, which of course means that more diffusion takes place. It's aiding performance because, of course, therefore we can do more work aerobically. Now, we would go on with further features, but the point I want to make here, folks, is that in your revision, you should be practicing question after question after question within here, okay? So there's lots of examples of what you can do. Now, we've got, excuse me, sorry for the cough. I should stress here, by the way, of course, you can actually pause this, even if you're in the live session, have a go at some of those questions. But what we're going to do is we're going to move on to an explain why question. And I'm going to get out my writing pen, which of course is going to be black because we write in black in the exams. And what we're going to do here is we're going to explain why it's essential for veins to contain valves. And I want you to notice that we are recommending the language of because, this means, and therefore common. Now, there are other explanatory terms, but what I'm going to do with this first answer is I'm going to bring this whole answer in, and then we're going to have a look at its construction before we make an alternative. So let me bring the answer to you. Now, students, this might well be the first time you've seen this answer. The teacher has already got this in their notes, okay? So what we're going to do first of all is notice something. We have highlighted for you that in an explain why command, we are getting terms like because, this means, therefore, comma. You can clearly see that this writer, no matter what they've written, is writing in an explanatory way. Now, what we can do is we can actually start to mark this, and then we'll reproduce it in a different format here. This is because veins are the blood vessels furthest away. So I am going to say that that is correct for one of the reasons why veins have valves. And I'm going to put a mark over here. So I've got my 1 out of 2 so far. This means that the blood in the veins is at the lowest pressure. So there's our second mark. Notice that after because, mark. After this means mark. Now, obviously, you need to write accurately for that. But I've now got my max for this question. And what your examiner will do is probably stop marking at that point. What we are going to do is go have a look at this third point. Therefore, they benefit from valves which prevent the backflow of blood. Okay, so that would have been a mark if we hadn't already been at max. But of course, we've now got our 2 out of 2 on that particular question. Now, just with that in mind, I just want to mention something that I often say to my students. By the way, you can ignore this advice by all means if you prefer. But I often say to my students, with questions like explain questions, describe questions, discuss questions, I say to them, play for bogey. Now, if you don't play golf, you probably wonder what the hell I'm talking about. In golf, bogey is when a par 3 or par 4 hole and you score 1 extra point. Now, what I mean by that is in golf, a par 3 and you get 4 on that particular hole. In other words, look, there were 2 marks available and this person has attempted at least to make 3 points. And that is just something for you to consider. Would I do it with this question up here? No. I wouldn't do it on this one because there's no point. But on these questions where you're looking to pick up 2 marks, what if I didn't quite make that middle point well enough? My backup, my third one, would help me out. Now, with all that in mind, folks, we want to now take this further and say, okay, how would this answer differ if it was not why do veins contain valves, but why don't arteries? We're still going to explain why. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to get a little bit cheaty. And I'm simply going to say, there's no cheating involved, by the way, but I'm not even going to be polite and say this is because. I'm just going to say because veins, let me give you the correct answer, because arteries are the nearest to the heart. You know, if you look at the answer we had above, basically repeating that same phrase, they are the arteries nearest to the heart. Full stop, and I'm going very much in shorthand here. And I'll separate with a line. Not that you should do this in the exam, but just so you can see my 3 different explanatory points. This means that the blood is at high pressure. So there's going to be my second point. Notice my explanatory language. And I'm going to put down here, just using a space to emphasize, you don't need to do this in the paper, but therefore, comma, what am I going to say here? Valves are no benefit. Valves are no benefit. And I'm going to use a second because here, because they prevent backflow when low pressure. So if we consider the answer very similar, sorry for my scruffiness, I'm sort of doing this in front of you and trying to do it fast. But notice here, folks, that what we've got here, nearest to the heart, is going to be 1 mark. We've got high pressure, it's going to be 1 mark. Now I've got my max, and of course I've played for bogey, and I've said here, valves are no benefit because they're there to prevent backflow when the blood is low pressure. So that would be a 3rd mark, but of course I don't need it. Why? Because I've got my 2, and of course at that point we can move on to the next question. So let's move to topic 8, levers, everyone's favourite. Well, actually, literally one of my favourites. So let's answer the questions. Here we've been asked to identify a class of lever systems. So the first thing I'm going to do here, folks, is I'm going to ask myself which of the components is in between the others. Okay, not in the middle, in between. So of course here I've got my fulcrum, which is in between my load or resistance and my effort. So here, of course, because it's fulcrum in between, this means that it's a first-class lever system. Why? Because we know that first-class lever systems have their fulcrum in between the other two components. For 1, 2, 3, think FLE. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go back to our teaching videos on this. So this here is definitely, should be writing in black, of course. This is definitely a first-class lever, okay? Now, if I am going to convert to black here, because that's the colour I should be writing in for the answers, and it asks me to give a sporting example of this system. So there's loads I can give here, especially elbow extension, but what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say neck extension, and just for the context of this, just be aware that that is sort of putting your head back as if you're looking up into the air. It's neck extension when a volleyball player, is preparing to set the ball, I'll put a high ball, okay, just to make it even more clear. So I've got my example in the neck extension when a volleyball player is preparing to set, and that's that one where you sort of put your fingers towards each other and sort of do a nice vertical shot, but of course the ball would be coming down upon them, and of course they would be looking up as if they're sort of towards the sky. That is excuse me, our example of that first class lever system. Now, keeping with the same lever system, and actually it's quite a tricky question this, we're being asked to explain why this lever operates at mechanical advantage. So of course we tend to think about mechanical advantage with regards to second class lever, but this is a first, right? Well, how can this one be a mechanical advantage lever? Well, what we want to do here is we want to look at the relative differences. First of all, here's the position of our fulcrum. I'm only freehand drawing this, but if I was to draw that to the center of the load or the resistance, what I've got here is I've got a load, What I've got here is I've got a load arm. I've got the distance between, the perpendicular distance between the load and the fulcrum. But if I go from here to here, I've got the effort arm. And what we can see quite clearly here is that the effort arm is longer. So because we've been asked to explain why, we are definitely going to be using the language of because, okay? So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to bring the answer and show the answer, and we're going to mark it together. Remember, you can pause this if you want to write the whole answer down. Remember, your teacher has got this answer already if you're working with your teacher. But what we're going to do here is we're just going to bring our answer in, and I'll just take a bit of time with it. First of all, in our orange, I'm definitely seeing that this person is explaining. There's a because there. There's a this means here. This person is definitely trying to explain why. So just little highlights for that. But what's perhaps more important here is let's look at what they've said. Because the lever arm has a greater distance. By the way, the lever arm is this entire thing here. This whole thing is the lever arm. It has a greater distance between the effort and the fulcrum. So the effort arm, there's a greater distance. So try and be neat. Has a greater distance between the effort arm, there's my mark, compared to the distance between the load arm. So I've effectively said that this bit here is longer than this bit here. And that leads to mechanical advantage. This means that the lever can move relatively large loads with less effort. And there would be our second mark. We would get our max. And here, of course, we'd have our 2 out of 2. I probably should have highlighted more of that top answer there. Greater distance between the effort and fulcrum compared to the distance between the load and the fulcrum. Okay, so I should probably circle that whole thing. Now then, when we move down here, we've been asked on this particular activity to state the levers that are occurring. So let's just go through this. First of all, I've got this one here. I've got elbow extension. This thing's, it's flexed now, but it's going to be extended, right? So that means that one is a first class lever, okay? That's a first class lever. Why? Because the fulcrum is between the load and the effort. The knee, it doesn't matter whether we've got knee flexion or extension. This one is always a third. So any movement of the knee is going to be a third class lever. Here, it looks like this person is going up in this direction. We're talking about the elbow. This means that the effort is between the load and the fulcrum. I mean, I could draw it in if you were interested, but this makes this one a third. Okay, so it's a third class lever. Here again, I've got the elbow, and that elbow is going to extend in that direction during the throw-in. So that one there, again, is going to be our first class lever. And here we've got plantar flexion at the ankle. This person is effectively driving up to jump in that direction. This is where we get our second class lever system from, okay, because the load is between the effort and the fulcrum. So question here is select a lever from the 4 options above. I think we've actually got 5, but anyway, the options above that operates at mechanical advantage. So we've got a couple. I'm definitely going to say ankle, change colour please, James. I'm definitely going to say ankle during plantar flexion. So there's my mechanical advantage during plantar flexion. Okay, so ankle during plantar flexion. And what I'm going to do here, folks, is I am going to say on this part here, because, why is this? Because, well, what would it be? What have we got here? We want to take that language from earlier. Remember earlier, we said the effort arm was longer. We're going to say here, because the load or the resistance arm, because the load arm is longer. Sorry, guys, forgive me. I was talking about mechanical disadvantage, so I'm going to say not the other way around at all, flipping heck, because the effort arm, I could say is longer than the load arm. This means it can overcome large loads with little effort. Now, I'm just going to do a second one here. We can almost take that scrawny answer I've given there and sort of just bring it down. But what we want to do here is talk about one that operates at mechanical disadvantage. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to say, I'm going to take the bicep curl, and we could say the upward action of the bicep curl. It actually is both. I'm not going to get into that here. But let's say the bicep curl. And why is that? Why is that operating at disadvantage? What is the reason for that? And it's because this time the effort arm is not longer, is shorter. Now, just for the purpose of speed, I'm not going to, let me put it in, than the load arm. Now, you might be thinking you need to say what this lever can do. With Edexcel, sorry, a different example. With Edexcel, sorry, what you get a mark for is saying this means it cannot. So we're saying what it can't do. It cannot overcome large loads. And you might be wondering, well, why bother with a little effort? In reality, mechanical disadvantage is also an advantage to levers, okay? So we're saying it can't move large loads with little effort, but it is worth noting that mechanical disadvantage, even though I don't think this is going to get you a mark, it is worth noticing that they are really flexible, so they're really wide range of motion, and they're fast. So just bear that one in mind, that it's actually got its advantages, but what we want to say here is it can't overcome large loads with a little effort. And one of the key things you need to be able to do is to really nail down this hot topic 1 training methods. And we've got a question here. A netball team want to improve their speed and flexibility. Fantastic. Complete the table by stating which method of training would be most appropriate for them and an advantage of each training method. So what I've done here is, rather than just sort of coming and answering this question, okay, so which training method would we use for speed? Maybe we would use something like fartlek or plyometrics, maybe, which would be best for flexibility. Maybe we would use Pilates, for example. But we also need to be able to give advantages, disadvantages. So I want to imagine this question as a much fuller and complete experience. So what I've done is I've taken all the training methods and I've noted down which components of fitness they relate to best. Not only, best. And you might want to pause here and make a note of some of those ideas, folks. But what I really want to do in this particular session is to spend the majority of our time looking at the advantages and disadvantages of the particular methods, because it's here that I feel that most students will fall down. Like, what is positive and negative about these things? So let's take continuous training. It develops cardiovascular fitness. What's good about this? Well, what we like about this is it's very accessible. If you think about it, all you need is really probably a pair of trainers and be able to get out the front door, and you can do continuous training. So it's practical, we would say. We could also say it's little equipment. So both of those points could be summarized under practical or high practicality, because we've got little equipment. But of course, I should have done that in green, really. But let me do some negatives in red. What would we consider to be disadvantage? Well, it's long. So we find that this method is time consuming. Okay. We also find it can be, according to some people, I do think this varies with age, by the way, but it can be tedious, so boring, for want of another term. Now, there's different schools of thought here. I don't have the time. If we were in a sort of a classroom, and I'd tell you my theory on this, but I won't do that now. What about interval training? It's great for speed and power, wonderful components of fitness. But what's positive about it? Well, again, we've got little equipment. So again, practicality is super. That's really good. Okay, so we like that little equipment. It is good for both aerobic and anaerobic. So I'll just put aerobic and anaerobic there, because it can develop both of those. So we really like that. So it's quite versatile in that sense. But one of the negatives we have, and I'll just put it in sort of summarized terms here, is it requires lots of motivation. So people can kind of struggle with that. And sometimes people will struggle to get to that top end of kind of, how would you put it, like high levels of maximal performance and things like that. I'm going to go for a different green here, just so it's not quite as bright. Fartlek, it's excellent for gameplay. Okay, so one of the things we like about fartlek is it reflects changing intensity of gameplay. So we love it for that. Brilliant. And also things like cross-country running, cross-country skiing as well. But it's got its negatives, folks. This is not all positive. So what are our negatives when it comes to fartlek? Well, we need a variety. We need a variety of space, which is not always available. Okay, so that can be a limitation. You might not be able to run on sand, for example. And this is a really good point. It's hard to monitor because, and one of the things, by the way, one of the advantages you could put in over here actually is you can have different people of different levels of fitness actually training together. But because of that, it's hard to monitor what people are doing. So there's some limitations around that with regard to fartlek training. Now, if we go back to our positives on circuit training, what's really good about this is it's very adaptable. Okay, so if you think about all the possible variations of a circuit training session, they're absolutely huge. And the other thing we really like about circuit training is it can be tailored to any part of the body or indeed the whole body. So wonderful, we like that. That's really good. But there are some negatives, okay? We've also got this sort of notion of monitoring. It's hard to monitor. We don't really know what reps and sets people have done, so that can become problematic. And it takes time to set up and put away, okay? So it can be time consuming. Let's move things forward. Let's now talk about weight training, like in many ways the big daddy of training methods really, to be honest with you. But we've got a very varied experience. I mean, weight training is almost endlessly varying. So in fact, let me put in here, it's almost never ending in terms of variety, every part of the body, every different type of lift, different type of set and rep structure, all kinds of different things. So incredibly versatile. But we've got problems. It's often the case, not always, of course, but it's often the case that poor technique will be applied. Think, young men in gyms trying to lift more than they should. You boys and your testosterone. Anyway, poor technique, it can lead to injury because, of course, it's quite high intensity. So that's something to maybe just be aware of. By the way, I realised the comment I made just now was incredibly sexist, but, well, you'll live. So let's just trying to create a picture for you. Plyometric training. It's for power, muscular power, explosive strength. People find this training method really engaging. So unlike, for example, our continuous training, which is maybe a bit monotonous and tedious, people love plyometric training, but there are issues like there are with all training methods. Right. One of the things people say about this is it can cause more harm than good. And what we mean by this is that you can, if people don't necessarily have the right technique or for example, make mistakes in what they're doing, it can cause injury more than it will cause increases in fitness. And then we've got all of our kind of our classes here, and I'm going to do a generic kind of positive and negative. There's different ones for each, but it can be so group fitness. If I just put this down as group fitness is popular. And if you think about it, a lot of people like going to classes because it kind of gets you into a mass and you follow the rhythm and you follow the instructor. But the downside of it is it can be expensive. It can generally involve a gym membership. And of course, you're talking tens of pounds a month, if not hundreds of pounds a month, if not who knows what. I suppose prices can go up quite a lot. But of course, now we can say it's quite an expensive thing to do. So coming back up to here, can you now see where the structure of this question is now answerable with all kinds of different ways here? And I want to come down to here, folks, because we've got almost the last exam question we're going to look at before a couple of sort of suggestions of others. As well as knowing the different methods of training, you should be able to show how you apply them to different situations. So take that word situation. And a lot of my strengths and weaknesses were about situations, weren't they? So we've got one here. Partway through the season, the netball team have decided to work on their cardiovascular fitness, justify their choice of fartlek training instead of continuous. Can you see how this is largely a compare question? And what I'm going to do on this particular one is I'm going to bring the answer and see. I want you to look at the nature of the sentences that this person has put. Okay, so we've got fartlek training is more appropriate than continuous for a netball team as it will match the changing intensities of the match. So if we just go back up to here, can you see how changing intensities and gameplay all of a sudden the positive get matched together, as opposed to continuous training where we're sort of saying it can be one pace, can be tedious. So there, I need to be on the top of that layer. So here, folks, we've got this kind of marking point. And notice how it's comparative in nature. I need to say why one is better than the other to actually get the mark, which steady state continuous will not do. Fartlek training is also more engaging. So fartlek's more engaging and less demotivating. So can you see, again, just going back up to that table, can you see how I've taken my tediousness, and fartlek training is kind of, people quite like it because it's game related. And you see how we turned that into a mark. I put my mark in there and we get our max. Now to finish off with fitness testing, guys, we've put in we've put in 3 questions for you to ponder and for you to do after this session. So what happens if you change interval training to improve speed comparison for 400? So what happens if you just take this question, right? Just take this question here and just say it's not for a netballer, but it's for a 100-meter sprinter. Sorry, let me get this right. Let's say that you've got interval training. Okay, so it's asking you to justify interval training, and it's asking you for saying whether it's better for a 100-meter runner or a 400-meter runner. So you see how it would be probably more relevant for a 100-meter runner because their performance is shorter, more stop-start. A 400-meter runner needs longer, extended periods of running, for example. How might you adjust fartlek training for a cross-country runner or a games player? You notice with a cross-country runner, you notice how things like surface might become relevant. You notice how things like hills might become relevant. Whereas a games player, this is probably going to be all about changes of intensity, and of course, therefore, the answer for fartlek is slightly different for different people. And how might you alter a weight training session for a weightlifter to a tennis player? So our tennis player is probably going to do quite a lot of like muscular endurance work, right? They're probably going to do things like 60% of maximum lift, 4 sets of 20, something like that. Well, in fact, let's put that in. So they're going to do 60%, 4 times 20 reps. That would be our tennis player. But can you see how a weightlifter, they might be doing 90% maximum lift, and they might be doing 6 reps, 6 sets of 4 reps, I should say. So can you see how it's important to be able to justify the difference between different individuals and using the same thing, using the same training method? Now, just coming back to here, folks, we just want to remind you that our planning document for the 9-mark writing is here, and that's something that would really help you, we believe. So we encourage you to scan that and to get yourself stuck into that planning experience.